till vi kanske har det ändå. Alltså vi måste här kolla på.
It's just a man to put up the flag. A couple of years back, one of the 19.
Yeah, but is it one we? Oh yeah, sorry. Oh yeah, sorry.
Oh, especially in her.
No, you're going to get a good land.
He was going to give his best man, Richard, was going to be on for saving that.
The interview definitely weren't returning. I don't recognise that.
Up down the town.
Good evening everybody, welcome to our ceremony here in Macroom this Easter Sunday. Babalam Fata Rob and Shana an last specialty Danashun from Connacht all of the Heron or Macroma, Clonbrhood, Bendegree, Kilometre, Alice Carriganima, and Marshallah as an art show 1916. I would like to welcome you here today on this special day for our nation to commemorate the Irish volunteers from the companies of Macroom, Clonbrhood, Bendegree, Kilometre and Carriganima who marched out from here in Easter 1916. These men marched to Carriganima in the first stage of the southern part of the 1916 Rising. It was intended that these local units would act as an advance guard for the units of the Irish volunteers from Cork City and County who were making their way to Macroom. They planned to use the arms from the ship the Ord, which was due to land in Kerry, to launch the Rising here in the south. But because of the loss of the Ord, this part of the Rising did not occur. However, many of those who marched out that day were subsequently interned by the British in Frongoch internment camp in Wales, and they formed the basis of the fight for freedom during the War of Independence in this area. So in memory of those men and women, we begin our ceremony. First of all, during the year, one of our committee members, Michal O'Hanlon, who was a very dedicated member, passed away, and we would now like to have a minute's silence in his memory and all those who passed away over the years who supported this event here in Macroom. As I stated, Michal O'Hanlon passed away during the year, and I would now like to invite his daughter, Maura O'Hanlon, to come forward and to lay the wreath to the memory of those great men and women who sacrificed all in the struggle for freedom. College come forward and assign a ticket to the Rosary in memory of the Patriot Day.
Diabli, on Keedron Diva, Glorber, and Tasheri. And Animana, August and Deek, August and Spade, Nave, Amen. Honor, the name of Canon, the Dr. of the Wheel, the name of the Hundred and John of Marajan and Nav. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Come in here to the village, call on the grass, the conti and the lap, the spanner, who would driven oil, August the spanner, for the Vinny Easter. Lord of the Nahir, August and Vach, August and Spid Nave. Bimid Sona Shiri, and the Hanam Kulpilir, August Ramka, Nanina Kroga, a great Asuna Herden, August Hogamaha, Asuna Dira, August Sona Pedun, Vanilla Dia, Choka, Orha. In Animana, August and Beak, August and Spid Nave. Amen.
Margaret Khan. I'd now like to invite Brendan McCarthy to go forward to read the proclamation.
Abloch na Hearn, the provisional government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army, having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right, and again asserting it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state, and we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and all of its paths, cherishing all of the children of the nation equally and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided a minority from the majority in the past. Until our arms have wrought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government representative of the whole people of Ireland and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women, the provisional government hereby constituted will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDermott, P. H. Pearce, James Connolly, Thomas MacDonagh, Eamon Kent, Joseph Plunkett.
Thank you, Bernard. Now we are privileged today to have as our guest speaker Maurice O'Callaghan. Maurice is an author, film director and lawyer and is originally from Enniskeane. He graduated from University College Cork and practiced law for over 20 years. Maurice's recent historical novel, set during the War of Independence, In Their Dreams of Fire, was described by President Michael D. Higgins as the most important Irish historical novel for a generation. Maurice has directed many films such as the recent The Lord's Burning Rain, which was screened at the Cork Film Festival. However, we know Maurice best as director and producer of the international renowned 1994 motion picture Broken Harvest, which was inspired by the men who fought for our independence and is a form that film that I would like to quote. There was a time not long ago when an Irishman could not even own a horse. We changed all that. All we wanted was to look across our own fields and say, these are our fields. To meet any man on the road and look him in the eye with our heads high, doing things our way, not their way. So on this, the 99th anniversary of the 1916 Rising, we welcome Maurice O'Callaghan to Macroom and I now invite him to come forward to give the oration.
According to Lear, go to Mila Mahagad Pat as Octon Quida, a Gavshiv Dom, Contacting Chogadi on Balias Darul, Orsa Shaw Macroom, Conan Oroid, Shaw Hort, Con Comora Nakoska, a Yanov. Is on Shaw, a Rugog on Lair, Kroga Arto Lere, in Akalive, a Garrigan Emma. Agus is an seo a thug Eileen Dove O'Connell céad súil agus is an seo ar á leirc go come sí an dán orsa úd Cuinoartaí Léire, the lament for Arthur Leary. Now, Macroom is a wonderful and a great historic town with a fantastic and long history. And I won't go into the detail of the men of the companies who went out here in 1916 because Pat has already done so. But suffice it to say that we are gathered, and I'm delighted to be gathered to be here in this historic town to deliver this oration. Now, among my most vivid memories are the RTE programs celebrating the 50th anniversary of the 1916 Rising. This was in 1966. It was called Insurrection, or Seachtar Fear, Shock Law, and it held the country's attention for an entire week. It was narrated in dramatic fashion by a great actor called Ray McAnally, and it was constructed in such a way as if the action were taking place before our eyes, like a documentary or a newsreel. It had wonderful music composed by Sean O'Riordan, who did the symphony Misha Era, and the country celebrated with gusto. There was no question of doubt or shame associated with it, and the nation felt good about its origins, as if it were the natural and the right thing to do. In 1966, I was a boarding student west along the road here in Coloshteesaga and Ballyvourna, at a time where I learned to speak Irish as good as I have it now, even though I've forgotten quite a lot, and where, apart from studying, our main preoccupation was playing Gaelic football. I passed through Macroom here every term on my way to and from the college, and I met and became friends with many people from Macroom. A year or two later, I even remember playing a game of football for Cork seniors against Kerry in the National League on a very wet day here in Macroom. I'd been a precocious Cork minor, and I thought I was the bee's knees, and that day I found myself marking the great Mick O'Connell. Mick was about 10 years older than I, and one of my all-time heroes, and the greatest footballer I've ever seen. Anyway, Mick got fed up of playing in the rain, and he limped off at half-time. Injured more, yeah. Now, I thought I had achieved a great goshka by playing the great Micko on that day, only for him to turn out the year after and win another Senior All-Ireland medal with Kerry, much to my dismay. I'm afraid that senior medal with Cork eluded me in 1973 because I was over in America and I wasn't available for selection. But that's to digress from the subject here at hand today. A change came over the country during the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. We became sophisticated in our own minds. We began to make money and we began to look outward, and in some circles it became fashionable to go back and to look at the events of 1916 and to question their very authenticity. In other words, these revisionist rewriters of history suggested that there could have been another way to achieve independence, such as by home rule. Now this trend has increased, and you have such commentators as John Bruton, Owen Harris and Kevin Myers today deploring the fact that we should commemorate the centenary at all, much less celebrate it. They say we'll send the wrong message, that we'll offend our British neighbours. They say we should invite British royalty and turn the event into some kind of a backslapping carnival so as to encourage tourists to visit and say what a wonderful and obedient little country we are. Good Europeans, top of the class with Angela Merkel, goody two-shoes to our new masters in the European Union. But these revisionists take no account of the history of this benighted land. They try to ascribe the political and social mores of today to a time 100 years ago when things were totally different. They are rewriting history to suit their own agendas and to exclude certain present-day parties, such as Sinn Féin, from power by attempting to cast doubt on their bona fides, by suggesting the country will go to a hell in a handbasket if they are elected. In other words, they're indulging in blatant scaremongering to frighten people and keep them in their place. This happened before. It happened during the years of the Great Famine from 1846 to 1850. This was, without doubt, the greatest tragedy ever to befall Ireland. Our population reduced by half, millions died of starvation, scarlet fever and cholera. 2.5 million people emigrated. We conveniently forget that the British economic policy of laissez-faire allowed this to happen. The market should prevail. The fittest should survive. The poor should be kept in their place and the big landlords allowed to expand their holdings by clearing the tenants off the land. 20 ships a week might export grain and cattle to England, while one ship might bring desperately needed yellow meal to feed the starving in Skibbereen, in Ballydehob, in Kilmichael and in Macroom. The horrors of the famine led directly to the rebellion of 1916, but not immediately. It took a further 66 years. During those intervening years, the Young Irelanders were formed, and then the Fenians, then Michael Davitt and the Land League. Pearse read the great oration at the grave of O'Donovan Rossa, and then he and his companions wrote the Proclamation of 1916. The Irish people were no longer fooled. They knew that the interests of Ireland would never be served by a foreign empire. They knew they could not be trusted and that British self-interest would always trump the interests of Ireland. They promised Home Rule and then revoked it on more than one occasion. Today, John Bruton, in his blinkered righteousness, says Home Rule would have come eventually. But who is he to say this 100 years later? It's all very well to say that a plebiscite was recently allowed for Scottish independence, but would this have been allowed by Asquith, by Lord George, by the Tories and the Whigs of the time? Would a plebiscite to allow Irish independence have been sanctioned in 1916? It is impossible to imagine it occurring because it was impossible, and no amount of wishful thinking will make it otherwise. Today, our country is recovering from the effects of a savage recession. Austerity, cutbacks, and unemployment have devastated the lives of many. While banks and bondholders have been rescued, people have lost their homes to the sheriff at the door, so that bailed out banks can be repaid. And those banks charging interest rates of 4 and 5 and 6% today, while the ECB rate is almost at zero. This is called price gouging. This is called extortion. Thousands have emigrated. Families' lives have been blighted like the blight of Black 47. Successive parties have failed the people, much like the people were failed in the famine. Is it any wonder that people are seeking alternatives and hope through such parties as Sinn Féin and the Independents, who will at least stand up to the outside forces that again threaten the sovereignty of Ireland? Elites will thrive as they have always done. Europe is a cosy cartel for Euro MPs and commissioners and former commissioners and for top politicians. For the wealthy, all is well. But not so for the poor. Just look what's happening in Greece. They're being told to toe the line, accept austerity, liquidize and privatize their best assets. This is also being asked of us here. Irish Water being an example. Do not be surprised if that becomes a private company owned by some billionaire mogul to generate maximum profit. Already, Dennis O'Brien controls one of the companies installing the water meters. It does not require a great leap of the imagination to see how Irish Water could become a cash cow for the likes of him a few years down the line. I grew up in a house where we were proud to be freedom fighters, where my father and my uncles and my mother's people fought in some of the great battles of the War of Independence. They had no choice but to defend their families and their homes from marauding black and tans, who were sent to crush the revolution begun in 1916. They were young men and women, poorly armed, poorly trained, but with courage in their hearts and a heroic vision. Those present-day pseudo-intellectuals and writers are not worthy of being mentioned in the same breath. They are not fit to lace their shoes. Without 1916, there would have been no election of 1918 when Sinn Féin won a huge majority. There would have been no war of independence. These events captured my imagination, and many years later I wrote about them in some of my stories and films. I became aware that the stories and history of my own people and my own place were just as valid and just as important as those from anywhere else. I believe to understand the present, you have to understand the past. And this is why history is taught in all major colleges and universities around the world. The Trojan War is still one of the most written about and studied events in world history, although it happened 3,000 years ago. The Americans continually make films and write books about their war of independence. They write about Valley Forge. They write about Gettysburg. The British, always assured of the righteousness of their cause, have toiled as a warlike nation that grew into an empire that bestrode the world, celebrating at all times their military achievements, erecting monuments to Nelson, to Montgomery, to Oliver Cromwell, eulogizing the warrior, apologizing to no country for their prowess. So why not we? 1916 was a rebellion of poets and dreamers and philosophers. They knew their cause was doomed, but by their dying, they changed the outlook of the people. As the great poet Yeats writes in his poem, Connolly and Pearse, MacDonagh and McBride, now and in time to come, wherever green is worn, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Yeats was no lover of Irish republicanism. He was essentially an Anglo-Irish loyalist with romantic notions of a Celtic twilight. Yet he recognized the supreme sacrifice made by the men of 1916. He knew and recognized that without that sacrifice, we would always be a nation of serfs, beaten, starved as we were in the famine, and wiped out. The deaths of the men of 1916 changed everything. Their deaths created a terrible beauty, both in the mindset of the people, in art, in literature, in politics. This kind of self-sacrifice is extraordinarily powerful. Any visit to the small courtyard of Kilmainham Jail to see where these men were shot standing up against a wall leaves a lasting and a haunting impression. Their sacrifice is not in vain, and a nation recognizes this no matter the attempts of a present-day timid government to make us think otherwise. So let us go forward, with heads raised high. Let us look all comers in the eye, for we are the indomitable Irishry, with a great history and a great culture. Let us celebrate the fountainhead, the source of our nationhood, which is 1916. And let us guard it and preserve it, no matter what wind will blow. Gurumila Mahagud Galer.
Thank you, Maurice. Just before I finish, I would like to thank all those who took part in today's commemoration, and I thank Jim Healy for supplying the sound, our bugler John Deneen, our piper Doran Taylor, and Michael Bradley. I would also like to thank all those members of the committee for all their work in organising today's event. I wish to express a special word of thanks to our speaker, Maurice O'Callaghan, for coming all the way from Dublin to deliver a fabulous oration. Thanks, Maurice. Most importantly, I would like to thank you, the people, for coming here today in remembrance of those men and women of 1916. And as we leave here today, we as a committee will be organising for 2016, the 100th anniversary of the Rising here in Macroom. So if anybody here is interested in getting involved on those preparations, you can give your name to myself and anyone in the committee. We would like to have you on board. To finish up, I would like to call Michael Bradley to sing or on the Bean, our national anthem.
Sing a fianna fáil atá faoi le géiring, wind ar slú, ar clean a roinní chuig, void vesir, Shantir a sing sir fasta, ni agfar, fuintir ar nothing throi, anach the hens of Arnabwe, legyan chil con wash no sail, legon the shkrech, Felach na pile, Shaliv Kali Aran Levia.
It's as simple as that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, sure. He called to me.
See it on Joanna,
I was talking to that for a long time. Wonders, I take two gentlemen here on the old wonders.
I wouldn't say gentlemen.
Powerful altogether. Got everything away then, John.
I know, yeah.
French, German, and Irish.
I know, we'll be.
What in such he said?
What in such is right.